Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Brea, Season 1, Episode 1. It is simply called Pilot, and it is a new show, so I'll start spoiler free, so I'll warn you before I go into any spoilers, if there is any to really go into. It's a new show from NBC. This is the pilot vote winner from September, and because it aired right at the end of the month, I quickly did this on October 1st, so here we are. Basically, if I was to introduce you to this show after this first episode, I would say, did you like Lost? Would you like a much shitter version of Lost? Then I have the show for you. This is bafflingly, obviously, very much inspired by Lost, and that's the polite way of saying ripping off Lost in many ways. There's some direct parallels to the various plot beats from the Lost pilot you can link up to this, and I was thinking this a lot. I was thinking this heavily before they had the audacity to have a character say out loud in this first episode, maybe we're just in an episode of Lost. What? Don't point out what you're ripping off. Like, are you mad? It starts off like feeling a little rushed, but the more it goes on, the cheesier it got, the worse the pilot rush effect was in play. And by that I mean kind of rushing through a lot of drama because they have to set up so much stuff in episode 1. Some of the acting is not good in this episode. There's one or two that stick out in particular is very bad. Now some of that might be the dialogue that is very cheesy and forced and kind of soap opera level of dramatic, but some of that may just be the acting skills as well. But the signs are here. There's so many. I'll point out a few parallels to Lost, beyond just the fact that it's a big ensemble with a kind of sci-fi bent to what's going on. But the general premise of the show is that a giant sinkhole appears in LA, and a bunch of cars and people fall into it because it's during rush hour one morning. They're next to the La Brea tar pits, and which actually, so this is a weird question to ask perhaps, but this made me think of the hit film Volcano. And I was wondering if this is the same tar pits that are featured in said film, because that's where the volcano comes out of, in Volcano, starring Tommy Lee Jones and Don Cheadle, and I'm sure some other people. But that's what I thought of. I saw these tar pits. I went, wait, are those the tar pits from Volcano? Am I recognizing the same place all these years later? But the sinkhole opens up, big action sequence with a lot of CGI, people falling in, buildings falling down, all that. But then one of the main characters we're introduced to, Eve, she wakes up in a field. And it's, they try and not make it too similar to Matthew Fox waking up in Lost, but there's a lot of parallels, such as the fact that she wakes up on her own and there's nothing near her, but then it doesn't take too long before she runs into the actual wreckage of a lot of the carnage and people kind of like figuring out what's going on. It's a lot like the plane crash on the beach. It's a lot like that. There's a lot of that. There's animals they run into, just like Lost. There's a quest to find, in Lost it was the cockpit of the plane, and this show they need a reason to find an ambulance, which they know was on the street, so they're looking for an ambulance, much like the cockpit. There's a lot of parallels to the pilot of Lost, but it is nowhere near as good. There's even some parallels in some characters. There's a lady who is a police officer who is kind of the Sawyer of the group so far. Based on this first episode. I'm not saying there's parallels to everyone, but there's definitely some to be had. There's a character who's a bit unhinged, possibly suicidal. I don't know who he compares to exactly. There's definitely someone that felt like this show's version of Charlie. There's a lot of parallels. It was kind of absurd just how many parallels there were. Obviously, it's not being lost on an island. That's the one thing it's not got directly comparing it to Lost, but so much of the other stuff and how the episode actually functions, and some of the things they go through as well is they're sort of realizing that they're all okay, and there's even that sort of like something mystical kept us alive because we technically fell thousands of feet and we're okay, we woke up unharmed, and yet all of the cars that fell through are all a wreck. So something kept us alive. Again, That was maybe later Lost by the time we kind of get into those ideas, but still very Lost. So you've got all this, but then you have poor acting, you have cheesy dialogue that rushes through some of the drama. It feels like it has to rush through some of the ideas, like characters immediately like, oh, we have to find food and shelter and blah blah, and that makes sense. That's true. They do have to find those things, but there's already like a stockpile forming. There's already like debates about people trying to steal food in this first episode. It just feels like it's rushing to plot beats. And maybe it's because the plot beats it's rushing to are the ones they know are not that interesting because we've already seen them done in other shows that have ensemble casts who are in a location or a situation where they're cut off from the world, and supplies and food and water and things like that are all going to be difficult to come by, so they have to figure out a game plan. But it doesn't change the fact that it feels like you're rushing through all these things, so they all feel absurdly unnatural. It feels that instead of getting a story where we're starting to see people not trust each other, we're just like going down a checklist of here is all the tropes that this type of story is supposed to hit in 40 minutes. And keep in mind, Lost Pilot was a double episode. I suppose technically this, if you compare it exactly to Lost Pilot, it is really just the first half of Lost Pilot, so I suppose the time frame isn't that different. So I guess maybe that's not something we have to think about. It's not so much that it feels rushed because of time, it's just rushed because of the writing and the poor choices that have been made with this episode. Along with a number of things. The effects, which is obviously something that tends to come up in network TV a lot, aren't amazing. I think they looked fine when the sinkhole started, but by the time it caught up with people who were running away and we were seeing cars fall in, it started to look really, really dodgy. And then there's some animals later. There's like a wolf and some other stuff, and they, are a bit more fake looking. So it really is going for Lost. Like, I mean, it is absolutely what this show wants to be, and the mystery of what's going on and where are they. And there is kind of partially an answer in this episode. It becomes a different question slightly, and the characters realize that themselves. But other than that, that's just all it is. And it's kind of weird because it's been, it's been 11 years since Lost ended. And if you remember, back when Lost became a hit, there was a lot of knockoffs at the time. There was a lot of shows a year or two after Lost started that tried to do not necessarily the same premise in terms of like an island or anything like that, but large ensemble casts and a science fiction, either slightly or overtly science fiction premise where there was a mystery that they could tease out and play out and sort of leave breadcrumbs and have audiences theorize over. But it takes a lot of skill. As much as I know a lot of people don't like how Lost went or how it ended. And I am full of opinions on Lost, but I love the experience of watching Lost. But I think you have to kind of give that there was a reason why people latched onto it in the first place, and there's a lot of strong qualities that Lost had, whether or not you do think it went off the deep end later on. For me, Lost was never better than the middle of the show. I think season 3 of Lost is kind of peak because it kind of fully embraced the science fiction by that point. And to be fair, this show is embracing science fiction quicker. But that actually might partly be the problem, is that it's kind of rushing to these big science fiction concepts, and the way that some of the characters in this episode are already kind of coming to conclusions just feels like it's just darting for the finish line, and in a way that feels unnatural and unsatisfying and unearned. It's the sort of thing where we want to be able to theorize a little bit before you get to the answers, and this is just, and I'm sure there's more to reveal. I'm sure there's going to be more going on that they've not gotten to yet. They have at least a season to do stuff with. I don't suspect they'll get more than one season, if I'm being honest. I'll be mad because there was a genuinely good sci-fi show last season called Brea, which got cancelled, and I am still pissed about it. So the fact that it's not like a direct, Brea was more of a spiritual successor to something like X-Files and Fringe than a Lost, whereas this is a Lost spiritual successor. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's actually a spiritual successor to Fast Forward or Jericho or Invasion, any of those other shows that were all knocking off Lost in those like couple of years after that started. So yeah, rough times. I thought that the characters' drama was really forced. The way that it's set up is that we have the mother and son of a family fall into the hole, so they're in the lost world, if you will, and you have the father who has a drinking problem, who has visions of some random things because of an accident years ago. Although it turns out in this episode, I suppose, you know what, spoilers, just so I don't have to dance around things. It turns out in this episode, but when I say this though, when I say spoilers, there's not really a whole lot in this episode that I would consider that much of a spoiler beyond just it's kind of the premise of the show, because episode ones, especially network episode ones, tend to feel that way. But it turns out his visions are actually of this place that they've went to, and he starts seeing more visions, but now his wife and son are in them. His daughter, who is with the wife and son in traffic at the start of the episode, is able to run away. She's actually one of the worst actors on the show, honestly. There's a scene where they're at the outside of the rim of the sinkhole, and they're distraught. You know, they think their loved ones are dead, and he has a vision where he sees his wife and son in this world. Which, you know, I mean, I think from now on, since I've said spoilers, we can just say are in the past, right? This, whatever this is, this portal at the bottom of the sinkhole is to the past. This is the same place, but thousands of years ago, before civilization, before all these things. There's some cavemen or something, but that's about it. But there's, like, you know, prehistoric looking birds and all sorts of things happening. And it's, you know, the characters who are there kind of start to realize this as well by the end. They see the Hollywood Hills and kind of start piecing things together. But yeah, but there's a scene where he starts talking about his visions and what he's seeing, and that he has to do something about it. And I shit you not, the daughter says in various ways the same thing about 5 times, where she says the line, "What do you mean? Dad, what are you saying?" And she says like a variation of those things like 4 or 5 times, and they all sound really forced. And it's not all her fault, because obviously the writing here is not good. Like, it's really, and the way he just believes that this is a sign they're really alive is absurd. And one of the most absurd things in the entire episode is that he kind of proves to himself that they're in the past, because in the vision he sees this handprint design on a rock, and he recognizes that because they've been at that rock before. So he goes to that rock later in the episode, digs up around the rock, hoping that he'll see like a street sign or something from the sinkhole collapse. And what he actually finds, like maybe a foot into the ground, from thousands of years ago, he finds his wife's wedding ring. This is... I laughed out loud at this. This is silly. This is so silly. Like, given how small a ring is, like a wedding ring is, the fact that it's only a foot into the dirt and it's right next to this rock still, thousands of years later, is just absurd. It's just this absurd moment, and he's like, "My wife and son are alive, and we're going to find them," and the music swells up. In fact, there's another scene between the father and the daughter where she gives this like soap opera monologue about how, you know, "My brother always said you let us down, Dad, but I knew you drank because you were dealing with pain, and like, you're not a bad guy, and but we have to accept that they're gone," and the music's getting really sappy, and it was really bad. So that stuff's rough. That's really poor. The stuff in the past isn't really that much better, really. There's some characters set up. There's like sort of a guy who's just high all the time, and he's kind of like the comic relief. He's the Charlie-esque character. There's a guy who's being kind of helpful. He has a gun, but he's also suicidal. He tries to kill himself briefly. That feels really glossed over. Like, they just kind of like talk him out of it because he knows where the ambulance is. And then there's a weird conversation where it turns out he's a therapist. I'm sure that'll come in handy. There's a father-daughter who are down there, The daughter's someone that at the start of the episode, the teenage or college age son was kind of attracted to, and it turns out her dad, who's another main character down there now, is a surgeon. So much like Lost, we've got a doctor. But he used to be like a Navy SEAL as well, so he's extremely high qualified in the situation they're in. But it sets up some drama where his daughter is supposed to be in pre-med, but she dropped out, and there's a bit of drama there with that or whatever. Some wolves attack them, the son gets injured, and he needs some antibiotics or something, and that's why they need to get to the ambulance. So, like, all this stuff, it feels like it's sort of like, oh, we have to go and hunt for this ambulance, so we have to go trek off, and it's just like the Lost pilot, but with less interesting characters, with weaker actors, and just everything feels so rushed and forced. And some of these stuff, some of the realizations and moments and how they come to conclusions is just downright silly. The wedding ring surviving in the exact same location for thousands of years. It's not because it's not like it was buried in the past. And even if it was buried, like I believe, like in that amount of time, I'm not sure if it would still just be there a foot underground. But it wasn't buried; it was just sitting on the ground, right? Like the number of factors that in that amount of time that could have moved the ring or whatever. I don't know. I'm no expert in this. I'm not. But this came off as silly to me. The mum character Eve, like, you know, I guess she's better than some of the other cast, but not particularly great either. And again, I don't know if this is on the actor, or if this is just on the dialogue in the script, and how it's edited so quickly. Because I mean, ultimately, there's only so much they can do with this. It's super network. It's super, like, we're pretending that this is all a big deal. There's like coming up this season at the end, it shows you some clips from upcoming episodes, and it just all feels very fluffy. Very fluffy. The mystery feels just lukewarm at best. In fact, honestly, the main thing about the lead, the female lead, the mum Eve, that was striking me is honestly that she looks like she could be Blake Lively's big sister. You know, she's a bit older. She's maybe like 10 years older or something like that, but she kept reminding me of Blake Lively in a lot of moments. So, yeah, and that's the most interesting thing I have. I am shocked there's not a pregnant woman. I really am. I suspect there's going to be some, and everyone lands scattered out, so they're all kind of separate, and no one really knows who anyone is other than their direct, relatives or whoever they were with at the time. The government knows more than they're letting on, because there's been another like rift like this somewhere else, and they're sending in a drone. It's really bad. It's not a good show. It's a pretty bad pilot. Conceptually, it's not the worst idea in the world, but it rushes through so much and just is so determined to be the new Lost, but without any of the actual skill that went into making that feel special. And whether that's J.J. Abrams' direction in the pilot, whether that's the actual good teasing out of some of the mysteries, and there's a lot of stuff in Lost that was almost like, people at the time said that it only existed because Twin Peaks existed, and we know that Lindelof at least was a big fan of Twin Peaks, and some of the things that they ran into, like say the polar bear, was very much like, oh, this is kind of surreal and weird. Why is that on a tropical island? And there was a lot of stuff like that. There was a lot of what the F moments, and there's nothing what the F in this. There's nothing that makes you feel that way. And not to say that doing something exactly like that would work, because it would just be another thing that feels like Lost. And there's like a saber-toothed tiger at the end of the episode. That's what it ends on, the threat of this tiger. But because we've already set up that this is in the past, it's not a big, it's not a WTF moment. It's just okay, here's some further proof that you're in the past. That's all it is. Because Fast Forward, which was a terrible show, which I watched for longer than I should have. I watched like 8 or 9 episodes of that damn thing, and there was some really bad episodes, some bad characters, some really cheesy dialogue in that. But they did the same thing. They had a moment in the first episode of that show where like a kangaroo, I think it was randomly hopping down the street. And I remember thinking, this is just your polar bear. This is you doing the polar bear from Lost. But it doesn't feel special because we've already had the polar bear from Lost. And it worked in that occasion because it was genuinely a new idea to do this weird animal that's out of place kind of thing. So, yeah. Laughably network cheesy with no weight. Mystery is not that interesting. They rush through too many ideas in episode 1. The characters and acting is soap opera at best in most cases. There wasn't really anyone who stuck out to me as kind of good. Everyone was, there was a ceiling, there was like a cheesy network TV ceiling that none of them could overcome, and then there was some who were actively even worse. And that's, you know, where I felt by the end of the episode. Obviously, I'm not watching any more of this. I have no interest in seeing another second of this show. It is trying desperately to capture a magic that I don't think you can capture again, at least not with the same, something so similar. It has to be a completely new concept with that mystery. With a new mystery, I should say, you know, with a central mystery that feels distinct. This just feels like Lost 2.0. I say 2.0, it's more like 6.0 at this point with the amount of things that have tried to copy it. But yeah, felt nothing. Drama's contrived and tropey and all the other things. All the other words I could use to describe it. So that's La Brea, episode 1. It pretty much sucks. I cannot recommend it. So I mean, at least it's only 40 minutes, and at least it made me laugh a few times with how just blatant it was and its rip-offing-ness. So let me know what you thought of the pilot of La Brea in the comments below. Like and subscribe, all that stuff. Get me on the Twitters. Myself personally at Wibble89. You can also get the channel as a whole at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. You can support everything we do at patreon.com/mailfuzztv for as little as $1 per month. But otherwise, that is me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?